I think we're going to try to get started here. There's a lot going on tonight, we hear. I know a lot of people are planning to be able to get away and go to the film that's being shown, and there's also a political event that people are going one way or the other, either to in favor or opposed. So we want to make sure that we have a good start so we can go through this. Really, for us, this is so exciting for us to be able to come to you and begin to tell you some of the feedback that we're getting from the community. First off, let me introduce myself. I'm David Perks, so I'm the director of the Gold Coast Community Design Studio, and I'm here with Elizabeth and Kelsey, and Kelsey's going to be doing most of the talking. We certainly want to recognize Mayor Karen Wilson, who's here, and we appreciate her support, and the police chief back there, and Sherry Lee, who hopefully many of you know, who's been certainly the energy behind a lot of this work, and we appreciate that. And we may be joined by Councilman Brown, right? He may come, so if we see him slip in, we'll recognize him as well. So I want to say just a couple of things just to get us started, and then I'm going to pass the microphone off to Kelsey. First off, in fact, there we go. So we're learning a lot about a really remarkable community, and it's a community that we're going to talk about tonight, a community that in many ways is very close, connected by way of churches and schools and family, but in some ways it's a community that has an interesting kind of challenge that shows up in this map here, and part of our work is realizing that we're working with a community that on this map, just to kind of get oriented, here's Twin Beach here, here's Young, right? So we're right, okay, so we're right here. Anyway, but on this map, and you all know this because you live here, we see that the kind of reddish areas are within the city, the ones that aren't red are out of the city, in the county, and so this is a community that is seeing a lot of change going on. They're seeing development happen in their community. They're seeing a lot of things that are impacting them, and it's a community then that for, its entire existence has been in this situation where they have, friends and family that are in the county, in the city. They don't always know exactly who to call when they need help with a road or a dish that's overflowing. So part of what we're realizing is the context of this community that is sort of divided up and being sort of part of the city and part out of the city is a kind of important background for how this community then both has to at times sort of figure out how to get help around areas that would be more straightforward for other neighborhoods. So this is something that we're becoming more and more aware of. But what's really, for us, really encouraging is our report here tonight about a survey. So first, let me ask, how many of you have done our survey? Okay, great. And if you haven't, you still can. And many of you, in fact, we'll point to a few of you that actually really helped get others to do the survey. Tonight we're going to go through a survey. And surveys are only as good as your results in terms of getting enough results back that you really have a great voice from the community. We're just very, very pleased at the amount of survey results we've gotten already, and we're still getting people to help fill out the survey. We did our own kind of just driving around trying to count the number of households in this area. So essentially our area, as you can see on this map here, we divided up into kind of different districts, largely centered around different churches, knowing we could enlist some of the churches and some of the people in the neighborhoods to do surveys for us. So within that area, we added up somewhere around 450 households. It was just our own kind of like driving down the street, kind of counting houses. And in the kind of survey world, if you get, say, 10, 15%, you're doing well. Well, we've gotten over 100 back already. So we're up to 25% already, which is great. But the thing that's amazing is, the thing that's important, we weren't the ones out doing the surveying, nor did we, get a bunch of, college kids from Iowa. This was a community out surveying their neighbors. And this is really important because it both says the community is working to be able to work together, and they really are concerned about making sure everyone knows what's going on. And so for us, that's a really great way to kind of frame this. This is a community this is a survey of the community, kind of by the community, and not by some outsiders. So this is important to us, and we really appreciate so much all those that were out there doing the survey. And it took us a while. We have spent the last couple of months getting to know some of your church leaders. We have spent time, like the heads up barber shop, right? We've been in your neighborhood to try to find who are some of the people, and some of you are part of that are willing to get out and to talk to their neighbors. And for us, it's been real inspiring to meet you, to get to know you, and certainly to see the commitment you have to your community. So we're here tonight to talk about what this survey is telling us, and then sort of where we go with that, and how this survey information becomes a very important part of the plan that we're helping the community put together to really identify their priorities and begin to work towards solving them. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Kelsey, and she's going to talk us through the survey.
First of all, can we get Valerie and Johnny and Maggie and Sally and anyone here who was out on Saturday going door to door, can you just stand up for a minute so that we can thank you for everything? Because this is tremendous here. This is not easy work, and you all know how hard it was to do that. So you have something really to be proud of. So David went over this. This was our survey area and how we tried to get it organized. I don't really need to talk too much about this. Most of you have seen the survey. If you haven't, we have copies up there so you can read it and get a little bit more familiar with it. We tried to keep it to 2 pages. You know how hard it is to get people to respond to surveys. So, of course, we wanted to use this opportunity and get as much information as we could, but it's always a bit of a challenge. So the first part of the survey, we wanted to really get to know the community. One of the challenges is that the census data that our leadership and departments and organizations have readily available to them, the census, doesn't always tell us the full story of our community. And so we wanted to get to know residents in this community better so that we could come up with strategies that are really going to work. And then the second part was getting all the residents to prioritize some of the issues or concerns, areas of importance that we had been hearing from some of the leadership in the community or felt like they had a good handle on things in the community. So you'll see that the results of that later on. And then the third part was we know how hard it is to get in contact with people, to get their input, to share information. And so we wanted to know what's the best way to communicate with everybody, because everybody communicates differently, right? So why is it important to do this kind of a survey? A lot of people have we've done surveys before. We feel like we've, talked about the issue. So why is it important to do this? Well, again, census data, the numbers that we often use to try to out and get funding to justify certain programs don't always tell the full story. And so this allowed us to get a much better picture of what the community looks like, what it's about. The second is that it's really hard to get input from residents. So you have a community meeting, and this is actually an amazing turnout for a community meeting, because it's when you're working, when you have kids, when you have all this going on, it's really hard to come out to all these things, right? We're spread very thin. But everybody doesn't respond to email or to mail or things like that. So how do you get all information from residents? And this has been a barrier in the past. I've been reading articles back 10, 15, 20 years ago where leadership, different people would use the fact that they only had a few people at the community meeting, and so they didn't feel like they really had the buy-in or the representation from the full community. Well, that's not going to be an excuse anymore because it's documented what people want and what they feel, right? And then word choice matters. So we can be talking about the same thing and want the same thing, but if we're using different language, we may not ever meet up, right? So understanding how people talk, how they relate to certain issues is really important to be able to share that information and to understand what people really want and really need. And people communicating in different ways. Some people they really need a phone call. Some people need a mailed letter. We're finding out that there's a lot of seniors and elderly in this community isn't necessarily represented in the census, and they really need a phone call. And that's hard, but we need to know that because they're not going to respond to anything else. And then getting to the bottom of what people really want and need is key to really identifying those strategies that are going to make it work, because sometimes it's as simple as putting in a speed bump. I mean, I don't really advocate for that. There's much better traffic calming measures, which the city has learned about in some of their recent projects. But sometimes we build these things up to be so big, and really a few little investments can make a world of difference in what matters to people. So what did we find? So I've entered 105 surveys to date. We've got 11 more that still need to be entered. We're hoping that over the next couple weeks before the holidays, we may still get some more input. We certainly welcome that. As David was saying, this is a 25% response rate, which is amazing as far as surveys go. So our survey respondents, 35% reported that they live within the city, 60% reported that they live in the county, and 5% were not sure. Again, this is self-reporting, so I didn't go back and check with the addresses, but we're assuming this is pretty accurate. We asked people to consider the logo on their trash can, because that's often the easiest way to know. This was a little bit surprising. So 29% of the respondents are renters versus 71% who own. Again, we weren't really expecting that based on the census results. And this, to me, was striking. The average number of years in a home, and this is low, actually, so 31.8. And I say it's low because probably 6 or 7 people responded that they lived there their whole lifetime. Well, that's not a number I could average. And a lot of people said, I've lived there 40-plus years, 20-plus years. So then I only put in 20 or 40, but of course it's more. So, I mean, that's amazing. People have roots in this community, and that's the average. This is also great. 89% are registered to vote, and 86% of those who are registered said they vote regularly. So that's great. I mean, you have a population that's already set up to vote and that's ready to go. 9% said they're not registered, 2% didn't know. And then household makeup. So we wanted to know roughly who's living in each household, and these are some of the things that may affect your housing needs in terms of accessibility ramps, different types of programs, maintenance programs, when you're looking at children, different programming around the community, different amenities. So 41% responded that they had a senior 60 or over living in the home. So that's important to know, and that's a pretty big number, and it's also not really reflected in what we're seeing in the census. 38% with children under 18. And this is big. 26% reported having somebody living there with physical disabilities. And often it's hard to find the funding to retrofit your home so that you have the accessibility that you need, or things like sidewalks, ramps, other infrastructure become really important when you're dealing with a community that has a high number of physical disabilities. So this was one of my favorite questions. We wanted to know, what do you love about your community? And there's a lot people love. And this is important because when we're looking at strategies or programs, this is something that you don't want to get lost, right? So if you're, yeah, David, please. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is a word cloud. And when you take the written responses to a survey, this basically makes the words that show up more often bigger. So, for instance, quiet, safe, location was convenient location to downtown, to other services. Some sort of the word family or friendly came up all the time. Family-oriented, people lived near family, family-friendly, familiar. I mean, people love where they live and they love their community. And so we need to be really careful to preserve this when we're looking to make improvements. I'll let you look at that for another minute. See if anything else jumps out. And then this was the question about, what do you see as some of the needs of the community? So space was referring to people needing more space in their home for growing families. So that's what that was linked to. Drainage came up, affordable housing needs, both rental and owner opportunities. People, especially a lot of the elderly respondents, were having trouble with just regular maintenance in terms of yard, home repairs, things like that. You'll see down there, I don't know, ramp and railing. So those are some of the accessibility retrofits that I was talking about, that people were needing help either funding or finding service providers to help them get their home to where it could really work for them. Sidewalks came up a lot, actually, in not only this question, but a lot of questions. Actually, that's probably one of the number one thing that people thought would help the area. That and traffic calming mechanisms. Did you have something, Sally? Yeah, it's because one has an S and one doesn't, so the word cloud thing took it as two different. I guess people needed help replacing windows, things like that. I think it goes back to that basic home repairs and maintenance. Yep. And so this was the community priorities. This was the ranking. And so the first thing I want to point out here is that nothing's falling off the list. So everything here is a priority. And if you look at the difference in the scores, they're really not that far apart. So when we do our action plan, we want to be able to address all these things in it. Opportunities for youth, employment, cost of living, infrastructure, so sidewalks, lighting, street maintenance, things like that came up a lot. Representation in government. And after we had people rank, we had them fill out a little bit more detail about that. So when we have a little bit more time and can go into more of the analysis, we'll be able to dig in a little bit deeper. Current housing conditions, drainage and flooding, services. Actually, in terms of police, fire, people were overwhelmingly happy with it. When it came to services, it was more in terms of water and sewer. Sewer connections are costly to make those connections, things like that. So in terms of services, that's what seemed to be ranking higher. Annexation, and then growth of the surrounding area. So before we do that, so we obviously learn a lot from the written surveys, but I'm sure as you all were out talking to people, you heard a lot more than what we're getting. So I wanted to give you the opportunity, if you have anything you'd like to add or comment, please tell us what you think, what you saw, anything.
I got to do, and I enjoyed it very much. Didn't do it that long, but it was really eye-opening in many ways. One person, she invited us in her home and talked a lot about many of the issues you brought up, and you do get more than just the answers. But we went out her back, and she's been trying to get a business was behind her, and they had a pipe that was open, just would take a $20 something to fix. And they'd ask them to do it and ask them to do it, and they never respond. Kind of out of sight, out of mind for that business. It's behind the business. And we suggested that she write the city, the utilities, and just send a picture and say, can you help us get this corrected? Because it was flooding. I mean, the gutters hadn't been cleaned. Although we went around the other front of the building later on our own, the people I was with, and those gutters were clean. The ones that were out of sight, out of mind were just full of stuff, and so it was a lot of overflow into her yard, almost up to her back door. And that was a solvable, quick thing. Yep. And I kept thinking, we gave her where to go and talk to her, and Sean, I was with Sean, and it really, I think, really helped her. We said, we're really interested in this, and you can get it fixed. Let us know if you don't hear something, when you write.
The great thing about this process is that the outreach that happened, the connections that were made are as if not more important than a lot of the input we got.
Because really it takes all of us. we couldn't have been able to do this without our brothers coming along with us, beside us, working with us, because we've been out of sight and out of mind for so long. And in order to get this work done, it takes all of us to get it done. If I'm hurting and in trouble, you should feel my hurt, because we all share the same journey, and we need to help each other. And I'm so grateful for all of y'all coming to help out in such a time as this, because in order to turn Fairhope around and head it in the right direction, it's going to take all of us coming together, being united as one Fairhope. One Fairhope.
Yep. Thank you. Maggie, yeah.
I agree with exactly what Valerie had to say, and also Savannah. It was an eye-opening and a beautiful experience for me on Saturday to go into these homes that I canvassed Kirkman Lane with Amisha Bush, and I was the token white lady, and she filled in the survey, and I was cheerleader, and I was just loving every minute of it. We were invited into these homes. I felt very welcome and well. I hid at first because I was afraid I was going to scare people. I've never been into a home on Kirkman Lane before, and I've driven up and down Kirkman Lane many times because the organic school is real near there, and you know, now I know who lives there. I know some of these people, and I feel like they're my friends. I'm not afraid anymore. It's just a beautiful thing when you get to know somebody that's different than you are, because all these people were not the same color as me. And I got to know them, and I care about them. Like Valerie says, we are one family. When you get to know somebody that's different than you are, you become friends. And the relationships that develop make it so that justice has to follow naturally. We don't want you to hurt, because when you hurt, like Valerie says, we hurt. Especially now that we're friends. So anyway, it was I haven't eaten anything today, and so I'm kind of goofy when I don't eat. But I really am sincere when I say this. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I love all of you. And thank you for loving me.
Johnny, yeah.
First of all, I didn't go nowhere to help with the surveys, but I want to commend the ladies for taking the leadership role and going from door to door. And I had said that I wasn't going to no white person's door, because I saw one time that on TV where a young lady went to the door and she had an accident, and the man came to the door and shot her dead. So I said I wasn't going to no white person door by myself. But anyway, to make a long story short, one of the things that I see in this community is, you know, like our younger children that don't graduate from school, we need a place where they can go and be trained to get jobs. And the alternative school is the one that I have been looking at, and we're going to start doing some talking. We're going to the school board, and we're going to try to see if there's historical money laid up for that school over there. And so we're going to start talking about working on getting this school from.
Talk to me first.
Okay, we'll do it. We'll do it. But now, you know the school board is over.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, okay. But we will talk to you, because you're going to be able to. We know you're going to be able to help us. That's all I want to say.
To me, it is the gateway.
Yeah.
And to me, it's also like a symbolic union of two communities. So it's a very important piece of property.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So next steps. So we have all this great information now to sort through. We've been working over the past months, getting to know city staff, city leadership, county staff, county leadership, how the systems work, what ordinances are in place. And so we're going to try to put together some short-term strategies, some long-term strategies that can be done to address the concerns, some potential partners that can come together. So it's not going to be on any one jurisdiction or person to fix these problems. Everybody can do a little bit of everything, and so we're going to help identify the different pieces that can come together, and then potential funding sources or mechanisms. So potentially grants or other creative ways to bring in finances to help move some of this forward. And then probably after the holidays, but before Mardi Gras, we'd like to get city staff and leadership, county staff and leadership, some of the residents together, bring them what we have as far as suggested strategies and things, and talk about the feasibility of some of these things who we're missing, how we might need to tweak it. Then we'll take all that into consideration and write the final action plan that hopefully the city, the partners, everybody can take and move forward on the same page. And that is all. Does anybody? Maggie, yeah.
Was there anything on the survey that indicated whether people would like representation in the city and as far as annexation is concerned?
Yes, we did have a question on there. If they, and it was for county residents, if they were interested in voting on city matters, so that will be analyzed in the full thing too. So actually, you've noticed that when we look at the list of priorities, a lot of things come down to jurisdictional boundaries and things like that, and so it'll end up wrapping all into, yeah.
Yeah, the thing, in fact, thank you. The reason we put that map up at the beginning is we realized, and we knew this coming into it, and we certainly have learned a lot since we've been working here, is that it's a kind of complicated situation, not only because, even when we talk to the city and the county, even in terms of street by street, a street will be maintained by the city and then maintained by the county. It's complicated in general, and as you know, it continues to kind of change because development then changes the sort of map a bit. And so clearly the issue of kind of government jurisdiction, whether you're in the city or in the county, is the kind of background for this work. So that's why on our next steps, really to try to get together in the same room, kind of city and county and community, and really begin to kind of go kind of item by item and say, okay, how do we begin to address these things? And because we realize that and this is one of the, and certainly this is why, Mayor Wilson is kind of having us look at this community, because it's a community that's always had this kind of confusing situation of being part of the city, part out of the city, and have the boundary itself somewhat of a kind of changing condition. And so we are very aware of that context and are here to try to help the community kind of sort through that. Because it is part of it certainly is part of the kind of makeup of this community, is that they have put up with that situation where they share schools and they share churches and they share a lot of things, but in some ways they have to go to different places to get help with some of the kind of day-to-day concerns. And so we're trying to help the community kind of sort through that and figure out how we can get, both in the short term and long term, ways for the community to have some way to kind of see how these things can be addressed. So we know this is an important context of this work, and we have learned that it's confusing for us sometimes, and we're the ones that, we're sort of like trained to know how to do things like zoning and streets and drainage. And as we talk to the city and county, we realize how, if it's confusing sometimes for us, I'm sure for the residents, sometimes it's hard to know kind of how to make any sort of improvements in their neighborhood when it's hard to know kind of who is actually the person they need to talk to. So that's part of what we're trying to work with.
Certainly doesn't make it any easier for the city or the county to service these areas, because when you're so intertwined and it's pretty convoluted, it's hard to know.
I
Yes.
just want to David and Kelsey and Elizabeth.
Unanimously.
We really appreciate being able to be part of this. It is very special for us to be a part of this. It's a real great opportunity.
And Karen also came recently to a meeting, our Hope meeting, which was at Homestead Village, and she said, I am available. Here's my phone number. Call me. And she meant it, y'all. She really means it.
This is the first, I guess, this is the first participant from the city that we have gotten, our communities have gotten, and God do things in His own time. So I'm just happy that God has given us a map that has some concern about the things of our community. So we are very appreciative of the heart that you have.
It really is all about, it won't have anything to do with me. This will be all
We understand that, but you were spearheading. He had you just like the president of the United States. You run it. I ain't talking about the woman.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I wonder why is it that if you live in the county, we pay our water and gas, city Fairhope, but our electricity is in that. We're there.
It's very complicated.
There's lots of different things, but electric started having zoning in the 80s, and they have districts now. So Lumiere Utilities, everybody has their own district. So I would love to be able to expand that because obviously the city owns on electric. But we don't have those districts for our water, sewer, and for our gas. So that's why you have two different when that settlement happens, everything inside the city limits, that was all. We can't expand.
Those are the kind of questions that, they're part of this community, right? Trying to figure out why things are the way they are. Yeah, please.
I was going to say, I worked for the phone company for many years, and I know with things like power and what have you, they are normally determined by a commission, because if you have a company out here, they have to have a certain area. And of course, if they had already made investment in that area, that would be their customers. And it's pretty hard to break, to get away from that.
I agree with you, but that's not the case with gas, water, and sewer. I think that it should always be competitive, and there's not anyone that will serve citizens better than the municipality. You'll have lower rates, better service, and because it is a service. It's not there to make this big, huge profit. So I agree with you. It's something to revisit, possibly, because our city is growing, and it does make sense for us to be able to at least take a little bit of a bigger stake, because electric is going to be cheapest through a municipality. So we want that service for the citizens.
Oh, let me say this too, because Pam, that was you and me and Barbara went to. One person said that they about because of all the people moving in this building, that we're seeing wild animals that we hadn't seen before.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. We'll have to look at that on the survey. So just to kind of recap. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Also, we were together too. We had people complain about their neighborhoods being dark, and they needed more.
Yep, lighting came up a lot.
Yep. In fact, so we, as Kelsey said, we just barely in the last few days, you all helped us, got these surveys back. There's a lot more information.
There's a lot of information.
And so what we're going to do now is really get into more detail. And so you'll have a lot more kind of some of that detail around things like street lighting and specific streets that people are saying somehow we have to get the traffic to slow down because it's going too fast. So we have, now that we have a really nice survey to work with that actually kind of helps us locate kind of where some of these things are. Oh, yes. Welcome. Well, thank you for coming. We actually we're just wrapping up.
So I'll just elaborate on what David was saying. So we have, because we wanted to confirm that the responses we were getting were in the survey area that we were targeting, we pretty much have addresses tied to the issues. And so in GIS, Geographic Information Systems, we can basically pinpoint where the certain priorities or issues come up more. And so we have the general priorities, but we can also get down to where is lighting a main issue, where is drainage a main issue, things like that. So we'll definitely be able to get more detailed to address those.
Anyway, that information obviously will be helpful for all of us. And we will, as soon as we get ready, we will organize another meeting to go through some of that in more detail and begin to provide stuff that you can kind of take with you to have that information. Anything else?
Thank you.